We have one extra paper today because we were late in the first half. So now we will have a paper of Sofia Voutsaki, Netherlands, Polarization, Identity Politics, Populism, Archaeology and 21st Century Challenges. Please.
I myself would like to thank the organizers for, can you hear me? Thank you. For, in a way, allowing us all to stop from the madness of the end of the academic semester and reflect about the bigger issues that we are confronting. When asked what would be an important challenge for archaeology in the 21st century, in many ways, I did not quite hesitate, despite the fact that we know there are very many challenges. In my mind, an important issue that we will have to face in social life in general, but in archaeology as well, is polarization. And I'm saying that in many ways because it does arise from my own experiences, but I very much think that it is something that affects very many people more than we would like in this room today, in this world today. Let me situate myself. I work in the Netherlands, a country known for tolerance, openness, compromises. Even this society is increasingly becoming divided and positions are becoming increasingly entrenched. But actually, I come from Greece. I work in Greece, I do Greek archaeology, and this society, and not just Greece, but the countries of Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, and even more so Eastern Europe, are engulfed in a process of increasing polarization, increasing division, increasing fear and uncertainty because of all the things that are happening around us. So in many ways, there are reasons why I myself address this question, but as I say, it is something that more people may identify with. So, if our main question is polarization and the kind of identity politics that we have already been referring to, the kind of questions like who are we, how should our society look like, how is it, what are the divisions, how should we deal with them, if polarization becomes a problem, the main point of my paper is to suggest that we, as academics, scientists, specifically archaeologists, have something to bring in, have a way to deal with the increasing problems. So I would like to suggest that what we need is more reflection, more nuance, and we also need in archaeology to find new forms of social engagement. We've already said, and that's something that I will come back to, that archaeology was conceived as part of the nation-making process. What is then the role of archaeology in the 21st century? I chose to concentrate on two concepts and two issues, both of them very ugly words, I admit, neologisms, words that do not really exist. I will concentrate on the process of heritagization, effectively the way the past, a specific site, a specific monument, the way its meaning and significance starts to shrink and shrivel so that it becomes effectively one slogan, one easy cliche, so that it can be, a city can be branded, a monument can be described in one short brochure, etc., etc. Not necessarily, heritage management is a very important part of archaeology at the moment, but there are certain developments in it that we ought to reflect about. And then the other aspect is, we've been discussing that already, the biologization of identities that is happening at this very moment around us, with the very interesting, fascinating developments in genetics, in archaeological science, etc., etc. So it may seem as if those two topics are unrelated or random, but in reality, what I'm discussing is effectively the scope, the nature, the contours of our discipline, which is changing under our own eyes. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you could say that archaeology is more or less that, the past, the material culture. But by now, I think the boundaries of our discipline are changing and are becoming more fuzzy, precisely because other issues, primarily the communicating, or rather, the dialogue with the public, on the one hand, so public archaeology, community archaeology, heritage management are becoming important parts of our discipline, and at the same time, archaeological science is becoming an important component, an important growth area in archaeology. So we need to think anew about the boundaries, but also the collaborations across those boundaries. In many ways, my concerns and my questions are also formed by the specific area I work in. And I work in the south of Greece, I work in southern Greece, in Laconia, in the area of ancient Sparta. I'm a prehistorian, I work in a Mycenaean palace or something in Agios Vasilios, but you start also a new project as a PhD project in specifically classical Sparta. But I've been operating in this region that has some rather peculiar characteristics, and that does shape also the way we do research. But I also hope that the kind of concerns that we have there locally, by listening to what is happening in the region, so the local concerns, I do hope that they are relevant to other people in the audience. So of course, archaeology and Greece. Archaeology was everywhere part of nation making, we know that, but if there's one country in the world that this is really, really blatant and obvious, this is Greece. And I'm showing you, the farewell ceremony of King Otto, the Bavarian King Otto in 1830s that marked the beginning of the free Greek state. Now, we know that archaeology in Greece is central in the way people define themselves, the national identity. It attracts tourism. You all recognize the Acropolis. You all know it's the hallmark of the classical civilization. What you may not know, however, is that archaeology has been deeply implicated in creating those national symbols, in stripping out all those other layers that intervened from the pure fifth classical phase. So the Acropolis had Frankish remains. They have been removed. It was a Turkish village. This has been removed. The Turkish village had a mosque in the center, and the mosque was the Parthenon, and the Parthenon was a Christian church. All those elements have been removed, and it is precisely that archaeology has been doing. Archaeology has been elevating the classical period, and at the same time centralize an inchoate, incoherent ethnic group into the new national center, Athens. So archaeology is deeply implicated in nation-making since the 19th century. But if we have sort of solved the problems of nation in the Balkans, we never have, but anyway, what is then the role of archaeology today? Sorry, this is the mosque. And now, how does Sparta fit in the story? Athens and Sparta, the two rivals. Athens, monuments, magnificent monuments that are supposed to be the hallmark, the highlight of human civilization, the classical period. Sparta, an austere, militaristic, oligarchic regime that was effectively encapsulated in precisely the negation of material remains. So, no spectacular remains in Sparta. That's all you can see. That's the ancient theatre in Sparta, and in the background, modern Sparta, which is a new city that has been built by King Otto on the top of the ancient remains, while in the medieval period, Mistra, which you see there, was the important center. You see Mistra there, overlooking modern Sparta. So Sparta has this interesting contrast between it's a modern city, with a past being both absent, no monuments, and yet present. Everywhere you dig, you're gonna hit ancient remains, the ancient city. And this is, of course, creates some problems for modern tourist industry and heritage management. So I see. The absence of monuments never deterred archaeologists and travelers. They imagined them. So already in the end of the 18th century, Abbé Barthélemy could devise an imaginary map of Sparta, ancient Sparta, with an agora and monuments and sanctuaries and residential areas with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. And in reality, and I'll come back to that, this is an important part of our story, there are still lots of things we don't know about Sparta, because Sparta, as the city-state, does not conform what we know about most Greek city-states. It's totally different, materially, socially, etc. I'll come back to that. I don't seem to have mastered this. Okay. And then, you know, Sparta, this strange regime, something between oligarchy and aristocracy, and with kings, and militaristic, with a very heavy emphasis on fighting and the physical education. So in some ways inspiring. Most athletic associations around the world are called Sparta, but at the same time oppressive, because you were only a member of a fighting force, and at the same time liberating, because the citizens were equal. And this entire mentality and ideology is encapsulated on one person, on one historical person, King Leonidas, who, of course, you may or may not know, was the one who took the 300 to fight the Persians in the Battle of Thermopylae. And of course, the moment a statue is found with the early excavations in Sparta, he is labeled immediately King Leonidas. We have no idea if this statue is of Leonidas, but it doesn't matter. But there is this other side of Sparta. There is the Sparta that is different from Athens, the Sparta where women were educated, participated in physical education. They did not fight, but they were fit to fight. This is the part that sometimes we forget. So Sparta has been both a source of inspiration for progressive movements like the French Revolution and, of course, Nazi Germany. So Sparta is both ugly and inspiring. And that's something that we need to retain. Of course, inspiration and the myth of Sparta nowadays do not live in Thucydides or in inscriptions. The film 300 has an amazing influence on how Sparta was seen. But which aspects? The militaristic, the aggression, the xenophobia, the macho character of Sparta comes to the fore. And if you Google computer games about Sparta, there are hundreds of them. And what is the monument of Sparta? Of course, the statue of King Leonidas. This is the place where you go and get a selfie, because as I say, there are no very many antiquities in Sparta. My story until now is kind of, you'll say, so what? You know, what's exactly the problem? Okay, that's the way it is. But it starts becoming a little bit more difficult when we move further. Look at the souvenir industry that effectively takes all those elements of aggression. Sparta by now is branded as, this is Sparta. You don't fool with us. Aggressive, nasty, as I say, macho. And this is the way the city brands itself in the tourist industry. It attracts things like the Spartan race, etc., etc. Again, this is not necessarily bad, although I should emphasize, this is one of the most beautiful landscapes of Greece. You could have an amazing potential for agro-tourism and cultural tourism, sustainable tourism, and we've been doing our best to promote these kind of things together with local authorities, but I will not discuss that now. So you don't need that, you know, singling out only those aspects of Sparta in order to promote. But then there is the really, really ugly side. Sparta has one of the highest proportions of Golden Dome supporters in Greece. Actually, the razzias against Pakistani immigrants are inspired on Spartan practices of, you know, the citizens would supposedly, perhaps true, would go around and kill slaves without being punished. Remember what I told you, how Sparta shrinks into one aggressive message? Those are both tattoos on the hand and on the shoulder of Golden Dawn supporters. King Leonidas to the left and L of Leonidas to the right. So it is important to realize that this isn't some kind of funny, nebulous, happening somewhere out there. When we work in Sparta, not the last 3 years, but 3 years ago, the Golden Dawn would parade up and down the square, see who was talking with whom. So this is a really, really strong presence in that area. So, our project, and very quickly, for some reason, I will not explain the scientific reasons, there are no cemeteries of classical Sparta. No, I will not say why. And one has been found now, and this is the classical cemetery that you see here, and one of our PhD students will actually be doing this archaeological analysis. This is how the cemetery looks like, and we suspect, we have very good reasons to think that this is a citizen's cemetery, because there are also horse burials, so wealth, etc., etc. For the rest, it's a very austere, no offerings, etc. So, and that's because it is Sparta, that some advantages to that. Literally within a space of 2 weeks, we could raise something like 30,000 euros in order to do the very expensive analysis. Interestingly, the preliminary analysis just started 1.5 months ago. There is an interesting surprise. So far, and I have to emphasize so far, large proportion of the burials are women and children. So it will be real fun to see if this is really true, because this will reverse our ideas about inclusivity in the burial assemblage. But anyway, I leave this behind. I've been talking so far about heritagization, but now we'll move into the effects of archaeological science. The moment we start an integrative project whereby we do osteoarchaeology and contextual analysis of archaeological data and isotopic analysis and DNA, we also need to think about how to integrate all those different methods and all those different data. But it is important to realize that each one of those different fields actually asks slightly different questions and is based on slightly different definitions. Archaeology, modular practices are about self-representation. They're about how people express their own identity. Osteoarchaeology is about both biological and social relations. Isotopic analysis is about provenance, although strictly speaking, strontium or oxygen will give you the geographic profile of the region where this person came from, or the precipitation, the amount of rain of the region this person has come from, but will not be able to tell you which region they have come from, okay? So, some problems there already. Ancient DNA will tell you something about genetic relations and kinship and provenance. Of course, archaeology, identity, there are all sorts of dimensions that one should include. The important point is that often all those different people talk about ancestry and provenance, but in reality they mean something terribly different. And it is this collapsing of concepts that in many ways becomes a fertile ground for miscommunication, but also for abuse. But it's not good enough to say, oh well, we have said that this monolithic culture has moved from Siberia to the Central Europe, which is what geneticists effectively say, and imply that it is then the public or the journalists that have misinterpreted the data, if the geneticists themselves based their own inferences on outmoded, out-of-date definitions of what a cultural unit entity is like. So, in many ways, archaeological science, DNA by returning to monolithic, unchanging, rigid cultural units. Isotopic analysis by dividing the world into between local versus non-local, as if there isn't an entire range of possibilities in mobility. Just by those very simple logical steps, archaeological science effectively promotes and supports division and polarization. And we need to think about those issues. So effectively, to conclude, what can we do about polarization, division, entrenched positions? I think our role as scientists is to keep the dialogue going, reflect on both sides, retain the nuance, make sure that we remain critical, reflective, also about our own practice and our own positions. It is important to remain self-critical and, for instance, also not just impose some kind of wishful thinking back to the past that they were all happy together and women were never oppressed. They were sometimes. Sometimes we need to accept both the ugliness of the past and have the past as a source of inspiration. And in many ways, Sparta, because of its ambiguous position, can help us in remaining self-critical and reflective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for your really very bright presentation. And who'd like to put a question? Yeah, please.
Thank you for this wonderful overview about the history of the companies. But the companies was long before the political place, and it was a Mycenaean fortress. Then it was destroyed by Persians, and it was for 50 years nothing happened on it, just to show this historical event. Then it was rebuilt, so it was always a political place where you showed the long-lasting history of the Mycenaeans and then this Persian episode and so on and so on. And now it is, of course, in another way instrumentalized for tourism, for politics, and so on. But I have a question about this biology session.
Yes, horrible. Yes.
I mean, you said it's a return to monolithic, unchanging identities. Didn't we speak about unchanging identities the whole 20th century? If we speak about the Doric movement or Bell-Beaker's college where in many these narratives we have there were biological suggestions, and now we have a tool to check if it is true or not. And I feel this is a liberation from these old biological assumptions which we always had in our archaeological narrative.
Well, thank you. In many ways, you're absolutely right. There's no question that until the mid-20th century, we were thinking in terms of monolithic cultures, but I do think that from, let's say, the 70s, 80s, particularly 80s and 90s, there was this very fertile discussion in archaeology about identity being something situational, fluid, contextual, etc., etc. At this moment, if you look at the original publications of articles by many geneticists, and I could say not everyone, but I myself have not read, and I have read quite a few of the Nature articles and many of the publications of geneticists. Their starting point is that there is something called a culture, and we need to check whether it's true one or not. Let me give you the one that perhaps comes most obviously to mind, the article about Minoans and Mycenaeans, where effectively, with very, very, very few samples, some like 4 samples from the mainland, the discussion is whether the Minoans and Mycenaeans are a coherent. Effectively, Minoan and Mycenaean is a construct, we all know that. Then the idea is whether they are a coherent genetic group on the basis of 4 samples, 15 samples, and how they're related to the groups around them, and whether they have any reality to the modern Greeks. Now, this assumes quite a few things. A, back then they were coherent. B, now Greeks are some kind of coherent group. Oh no, they are not. In the history of every Greek family, there is someone from Egypt, someone from Turkey, someone, a Jewish person, or so the idea of treating cultures as monolithic, demarcated, the geneticists themselves offer the possibility to return back to pure blood interpretations. And I'm afraid, this is exactly what's happening at the moment. But it is one thing to say the Golden Dawn takes this interpretation and goes away with it, or runs away with it. It's another thing to say you yourself have provided the conceptual tools to do so. And I think this is where I think geneticists do not understand, but they're playing with fire. When they're dealing, identity politics is fire. And if they don't understand that, well, somebody should tell them. I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little bit, but I do think this is much more an issue in the Balkans, in the Middle East, than anyone realizes in Northern Europe.
Okay, Maria was first, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And how do you think? We know that for example, results of research of Archeologia, research of tribalized research is quite difficult to explain with simple words. And from one side, we have very complicated information. From another side, we have very simply decision. Yes, and I think the researchers who have no simple answers and public with maybe some ideas of modern situation, social political problems, need some connectors who does this transformation. It's not science and it's not public. It's another both, I don't know, but it's maybe some translators. And I think that the main question about these mistakes and these deformations we need addressed to these translators. Who is it? I don't know. It's a special question.
Let's call them scholars.
In many ways, you're right. And by now, there is no question that raises the issue of how we should educate our students. By now, we have to educate your students in archaeological science. So, archaeologists, by definition, will know archaeological science. But let's now return to things as they are now. In every project that is being done, archaeologists are involved. But archaeologists very often are the ones who provide the data. They're not always consulted just before the final publication. What I would like to see is an equal collaboration whereby archaeologists are involved right from the beginning in the moment of the, let's say, research design. Thinking about the main questions and are not only brought in order to either provide data or add their names to a Nature article. What I think we need to do is equal collaboration. So you may well be right that we need some translators, but actually what I would like to see is geneticists, isotopic specialists, historians as well, when we're dealing with historical periods, archaeologists sit in one round table and discussing together about the issues. And in this way, there will be a real rapprochement, a real integration. But as I say, eventually I hope, by now it's happening with bioarchaeology, eventually there will be people who have one foot in science and one foot in archaeology and the humanities, and then the work will become much more easy.
Okay, Carranza, please.
Thank you very much. That was interesting, very interesting. One short point. In your list of analyses you were going to do of the cemetery, you had isotopes and you talk about provenance. You didn't mention diet. And I wondered if you were going to include that because it would be interesting anyway, Spartan diet to be the known thing, and would also be interesting for the other questions of the nature of the population. The other question I wanted to raise, though, is different, and that is about DNA and identity. What do you think the responsibilities of archaeologists are with respect to the vast number of DNA testing kits that are available to the general public and are interpreted in this very often nationalistic identity terms? What are archaeologists' responsibilities for that? So, one simple question and another.
The first question is simply here I emphasize migration, mobility and provenance to keep the discussion and bring DNA into the one table. Of course, we will be doing a dietary analysis, certainly in Spartan, and we will be using some rather complicated techniques. DNA kits, we have been discussing that with many colleagues around the world in a couple of workshops lately. There is, in some ways, if you think about it, people now volunteer to give their DNA. This is an amazing source of information, but effectively, what those tests gave you is the statistical matching against some, effectively, groups that are themselves the product of statistical probability. So, you know, the idea that you are half west to this and half Italian and 1/3 Neanderthal, I'm just making this up, of course. In reality, very many of those kids are absolute pure nonsense. Not all of them. And the ones that are good,
and I know that.
yes. Not only you know that the other side of things is that it is nonsense, but it is nonsense that will have its consequences on how people define themselves. So effectively, while DNA, some of it is nonsense, sorry, this kind of DNA, not serious DNA, it does change how people feel about themselves. And that is yet another responsibility that geneticists have to realize, that this isn't a game. If very often they say, oh yes, by now we have demonstrated the admixture of populations. Look at the internet. Look at groups saying about the pure blood of this, that, and the other. If they are arguing for mingling and mixture, well, they're not as successful about it.
Okay. You had? Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you, Sofia, very much for this very clear and powerful presentation. I agree very much in almost anything you said, in everything you said. But let me come to something that I think is a rising question that is really important. And to be fair, it's not only a question for you, it's also a question for most of us, because actually it has been crossed this room already several times today. And the question is what we can do. And not only speaking in general terms, but in a very specific terms. And the question for me, actually it's not for me, it's something that, for instance, I discussed many times with Alfredo, and we discussed many times in our institute, because we all there in Santiago are aware that we archaeologists should produce a new kind of narrative that could engage people and offer a positive view about humankind that could counteract what is happening, what is that either the pessimist views or either the national identity narratives are occupying the most of the minds of our citizens. So what we can do in that respect? What sort of narrative could we able to produce?
In many ways, we have all been thinking about this for the last 30 years of our life, whatever. Well, there is one thing that we archaeologists can do, and many of us are doing that already, and that is the important thing about archaeology. We are working close to the people. Our workmen in Sparta are Golden Dawn supporters. They're wonderful people, wonderful, sweet, family, respectable, reliable. They vote for Golden Dawn. So it's absolutely crucial to be able to say, yes, but wait a minute. Discuss, talk. You know, I think that is something that archaeology can do better than historians for the simple reason that we spent 2 months in the summer. Very often we are among the people that, for them, this past is even more important than it is for us. So yes, we can do something at the local small scale. That is already something. Then of course, we are all kind of, always quoting this kind of university thing, or our research institute, or the public sector, and you never have the time to think that what we ought to be doing and what our funding bodies ought to appreciate are good textbooks, good synthesis towards the public. But they don't score very high in our evaluations. And I think someone who should say to funding bodies, to ERCs, etc., oh, Felipe, you're the right person to do that, that it is precisely these kind of things that ought to be appreciated, that archaeologists say a story and make sure that it is read, heard by more people.
One more question.
Very well, I understood it clearly, but there are some different areas in Greece, and the history of Greece. We study history of Greece, and everything is wonderful. Do the other people in Greece think different? Do they appreciate the gloriness of their past, and how it relates to the polarization and so on?
Well, this is one of the strange things about the crisis in Greece. It has brought people back to museums. It has brought, there's a real interest in archaeology. I don't know whether any of you have heard about the Amphipolis saga, where there was a very important monumental tomb found in Macedonia, Greek Macedonia, I should say by now, problematic region, and it was front page news for 6 months. You'd go to the hairdressers and the old ladies would say, oh, the statue, the left toe is Roman, and the hairdo is late Hellenistic. There's a real interest in archaeology in Greece, but I'm afraid not only for good reasons. Yes, it is true that in archaeology in Greece we still have a narrow nationalistic, kind of self-gratifying, but by now self-consoling attitude towards our past. But what the crisis has also revealed is that, thank God, we don't only have that. We also have some kind of creative engagement with the past, a critical engagement with the past. During all those things, the number of cartoons and funny videos that were circulating about the Greek obsession with the past give us hope that people are also using the past, not only some kind of stultifying, oppressive thing, but also something liberating, inspiring, that unleashes creativity, that is part of our resilience, part of our sense of humor, part of joy of life. And that was heartwarming.
Thank you very much. Questions are over. Thank you.